time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, "By George, I think he's got it." Now, here's George.
Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome on in to another podcast by George. He's back in the house with another house call from Dr. Andrew Nish. We're going to be talking about COVID-19 and coronavirus. And, let's just welcome him in. Doc, welcome back to a podcast by George.
Thanks, George. As I sit here looking out my window, it is snowing hard.
I know. My wife and I were just having a conversation. You know, I was in high school. I was a senior, actually, with that blizzard of 73, which was very unique. That was a one-off. That was a blizzard. But it seems to me like we're getting snows and colder weather later in the year all the time. And I talk about the climate on my podcast a lot, but that's a subject for another day. I wanted to talk about some of the most recent information, some of the changes that are happening here with the coronavirus. And I'm always thinking about you because, you know, we've been doing this for almost a year. I mean, we've done a bunch of these, and it's been a kind of a progression. There's a good message that you've been sharing with everyone all along. But here in just the past couple of weeks, I've really noticed a change. You had two groups of people, basically. People that just didn't want to comply, didn't want to participate, didn't want to wear a mask, they don't want to get vaccines. Well, okay, that's that group. Then we had another group that I considered to be fairly reasonable and clear-headed and, you know, doing the right thing and self-quarantining and wearing masks and doing everything that they're supposed to do. Well, a lot of that is ending. I'm seeing a lot of folks, once they get this second dose, I think, once they're fully vaccinated or they're following the news or whatever, they're back packing the bars and the restaurants and hitting the airports, and they've thrown aside their masks. And it looks to me like the landscape is changing.
Yeah, I mean, you know, as with anything, we have coronavirus fatigue, right? We're tired of coronavirus. We're tired of living isolated. We're tired of, you know, the whole atmosphere that it's generated. And so we get a vaccine, we get 2 doses of the vaccine. We wait that 2 weeks after the second dose, and we've developed this antibody response, and we think that we're all home free. And, you know, we've not reached herd immunity. We're not even close. Okay. So maybe 30% of the country's been vaccinated. And so we're still at risk. There's still risk involved. And yes, there are more things you can do now. I don't have any problem with people interacting with others who have had vaccines. You know what? Have 4 or 5, you know, I've said this multiple times, have 4, 5, 6 people over. If you've all been vaccinated, have at it. I mean, you know, you've all been appropriately vaccinated, and let's emphasize that too, because when I say appropriately vaccinated, if you've had the mRNA vaccines, that means you've had 2 doses, not 1, but 2, because we know that the biggest antibody response is after the second dose, not the first dose, or you've had the J&J vaccine, which is a single dose vaccine. Perfectly acceptable to get together. If you have a group of mixed people, those who haven't been vaccinated, those who have been vaccinated, I think we have to be a little bit more cautious. We still should wear our masks to protect everyone, and just be careful. You know, exposure is based on several things. So exposure is based on how much virus is being shed by anyone and how long are you exposed to that virus, you know? And so, you know, we're several months away from obtaining herd immunity if we are able to at all, you know, if enough people take the vaccine. And until we do, until the transmission rate goes down, then we still have to be careful. And I think they've shown that in Michigan, the state of Michigan. They're in a horrible situation right now.
Yeah.
They're using up their ICU beds, their hospitals are full. And that just shows that this pandemic is not over, and that we still have to exercise caution, particularly when we go out and we're not certain who we're around. We don't know if, you know, if you're in a bar, well, how many people have been vaccinated, how many people haven't? So yes, we can do a few more things, but we still have to have this sense of caution, I think.
Well, these variants are off and running, and you predicted that that would happen, and it is occurring. And you mentioned up there in Michigan. I want to read this little snippet, this clipping from an update in the USA Today. It says, as variants spread across the country, the U.S. has reported 30% of adults are fully vaccinated. Nearly 50% of the U.S. adult population have received at least one vaccine dose, according to data from the CDC. Of course, one shot. You got to be careful. Dr. Anthony Fauci, the nation's top infectious disease expert, told MSNBC that people may need to get booster shots for COVID-19 vaccines in a year. Okay. So recent data shows that, this article says, recent data shows that Pfizer and Moderna's vaccines provide protection for at least 6 months. And the article goes on, but I read that, and the first thing I think is, I got to call Dr. Nish. I don't get this. Fauci is on record there. He's saying that we may need to get a booster in a year. And then this article says that Moderna and Pfizer may just last 6 months.
See, this is really a great question. I was just on a podcast or a broadcast with Dr. Marks from the FDA, and he talked about this exact same thing. So we've misinterpreted that data. Everybody interprets that as, oh, it only lasts 6 months. We should be interpreting it as, we know it lasts 6 months, maybe longer. But see, we're not out far enough to know that. So don't interpret it as, oh, it's only going to last 6 months. Interpret it as, we know it lasts 6 months, but it may last 9 months, it may last 12 months. So this is an ongoing story. The end of the story is not here yet. So in fact, Dr. Marks said, we don't know when we'll need boosters or if we'll need boosters. We don't know if those boosters will be the same as we got the first time, or if we'll need the boosters because of variants that are no longer responding to the vaccine. So this is all an ongoing saga. So we know 6 months, but it could be longer. Dr. Fauci, Dr. Marks, everybody asks, well, when do we need boosters? They're making a calculated prediction based on the data, but we don't honestly know. What we do know right now is with the second dose of the mRNA vaccine, those still seem to be highly protective of variants. Okay, there's not been this huge breakthrough of any of the variants to the vaccines. So it's just going to be a matter of continuing to study these variants, continuing to study people's immunogenicity to the virus as time goes on. So it's a time thing.
Let me jump up to the top of this article because it's something that you've talked about, and I know that you would have insight on this. This is Dateline Washington, D.C. The White House announced plans to help states detect and curb the spread of emerging coronavirus variants by investing $1.7 billion in genomic sequencing, or the process to map the genetic code of a virus. The funding, which comes from President Joe Biden's nearly $2 trillion COVID-19 relief package, will be allocated through the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to help states and other jurisdictions monitor potentially more contagious variants, including those driving that surge in Michigan that you talked about. New strains make up about half of all coronavirus infections across the country. Okay, what I wanted you to comment on is, why is this genomic sequencing so important? What does that provide us?
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to the history. So the country that does this the best in the world is Britain. Britain did lots of genomic sequencing, and they were able to see these variants very early. We were extremely poor at it. There was no money for it until the new administration. Dr. Rochelle Walensky, she's the head of the CDC, has made it a priority to genetically sequence these and know what we're dealing with. And the importance is to help us, number one, understand what strains are circulating in the population, and then be able to study those strains to see, are they more infectious, are they more deadly? And then the genomic sequencing will allow our pharmaceutical companies to develop new boosters, vaccines, whatever it might be, so that we can stay ahead of this, curve. And it's really important to know what's going on genetically and how this virus is transmutating or mutating over time, so that we can predict, just like the flu. Well, what strains do we need to protect against next year? Well, if we don't know the genomic sequencing and we don't know the variations, then we have no idea. So it really gives us a heads up on the future of what we may need from a vaccine standpoint. And it's hugely important. And we've done an extraordinarily poor job in this country at that, but we're now doing a much, much better job.
The next thing I wanted to ask you about was vaccine hesitancy, because you talked about that months ago. You expected it. You knew that we were going to encounter it. It's happening. But there are some people that are saying, and maybe they're just doomsayers or just wanting to take the negative aspect of this, but they're indicating that we've hit a wall, that the people that are going to take this have taken it, or we've got a clear indication of where it's going to stop, and it's not as good as what we would like. Do you think we're going to continue to progress? Is the trend going to continue to be in our favor on the hesitancy, or have we hit a wall?
I don't know if we've hit a wall. I mean, that's opinion it's someone's opinion. I think that there continues to be vaccine hesitancy. I think as more people get vaccinated and as more people are able to move about in a much more liberal fashion, I think people will go, oh, maybe I should get the vaccine. I think the J&J thing has given pause to some people, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. It'll be really interesting to see what industries require vaccines for use of their facilities. So, for example, if you want to go on a cruise, are you going to have a vaccine? And that may drive some people who might be somewhat hesitant to get the vaccine. I was talking to one of my old partners the other day, and she has a college-age son who refuses to get the vaccine. He goes, well, it might cause infertility, which is, that's been shown to not be true. So you have intelligent people that, particularly in the younger age group, just don't quite get it. But I think, I think that I'm an optimist. And so I think people will gradually come around. And yes, there's going to be a group of people who will absolutely never get this vaccine. And there's nothing you can do to change their mind. It's like a friend, well, I'm not getting the vaccine because she doesn't even believe the coronavirus exists. So I'm not going to change that outlook. But you know what? Let's be optimistic and say most people are going to get this vaccine. There'll be 15, maybe 20% of people who won't.
Well, in large crowds and in gatherings indoors, because you don't know who you're surrounded by and you don't know who you might be infecting or whatever, wearing masks is going to be recommended for some time into the future. I don't see any end in the recommendation for the mask wearing. And that must be particularly ironic or poignant to somebody like yourself that's been a doctor all of your adult life, surrounded by medical practitioners, that there's this huge resistance to the freedom and liberty that people say that they're being denied if they wear a mask. Hell, doctors wear masks all the time. I don't understand what the big deal is with wearing a mask.
You know what? I tried to use an analogy. It's sort of like seatbelts, right? So we are all literally mandated to wear seatbelts. It's illegal not to wear a seatbelt. But you never hear the argument, you've taken away my freedoms and liberty. It's beyond sort of my comprehension why this mask wearing has become an infringement on my First Amendment rights or my freedoms and liberty. It's a nonsense argument. I don't know. It's beyond me. Everybody buckles a seatbelt, right? Right? And we don't say, well, you took away my freedom to die as I launched myself through a windshield in a car accident. It's the same thing here. You're taking away my freedom to get COVID.
Yeah. I mean, it's ironic. It's almost funny. It's really not funny. But I thought myself, I've been to parties before, large gatherings of people. People have a Halloween costume on. They have a rubber mask. Wear it the whole party. I mean, no problem at all. They can wear a Halloween mask, but my God, they can't wear a surgical mask. Couldn't do that. I also thought about people that the country spent millions of dollars tinting their windows so that people can't look inside their car and recognize them. Well, the first thing they do when they get in the car, rip off the mask.
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense, but I don't know, we all think differently, and I guess I have to respect that, but it just doesn't make any sense to me. And I think, when you look at the amount of flu there was this year, masks really work at preventing the spread of viral illnesses. Yeah. And frankly, you know what? I might choose to wear a mask in the wintertime if I'm indoors at a large gathering. I didn't get the flu. I didn't get a cold. I didn't get anything this winter. So
that's all good.
Yeah.
Well, you talked about the the vaccination card, the proof of immunization. I don't know if that's going to walk, Doc. The reason being, the governor, out of everything that she could be commenting on, has already gone on record here in Iowa saying she's not up with that. She's opposed to that. They're going to view that as an extreme restriction on individual liberties if they have to show proof of immunization to go on cruises and flights and gatherings and that type of thing. Do you think there's any chance that any kind of a doctors or nurses organization or anything will support that, or is that not likely?
Well, you know what? This is a really sticky issue. There's a lot of ethical concerns with this, and I don't have a dogmatic opinion one way or another. I mean, we should respect people's liberties, and we should respect their freedom to choose to have the vaccine or not. I think it's going to be really hard for companies, this will end up in the courts, I'm sure, for companies to really mandate that you have a vaccine in order to participate in whatever activity it is. Yeah. And so I think that, China has a government, they can mandate anything they want. We don't have that, nor should we.
Right.
And I think freedom of choice, whether you choose to have a vaccine or not, is okay. And so I think there's going to be a lot of ethical concerns with mandating, particularly, and this is how we made the decision at the health system. We did not mandate our employees have the COVID vaccine. We do mandate that they have the flu vaccine. What's the difference? COVID vaccine's an emergency use authorization. It's an experimental drug, basically. And so that's a big difference. It's not a fully approved biologic agent. And I think we have to take that into consideration.
Well, we're running out of time as always. Before we lose you today, let's talk a little bit about that J&J vaccine, because that was big news between the time that we last spoke and today. Last I saw, it looked like it was coming back online. Is that so?
So here's what's happening with that. As everybody knows, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was paused in the United States because there were 6 cases of what's called venous sinus thrombosis. Those are veins that drain our brain back to our heart, and they had blood clots in them. They were in women between the ages of 18 and 48 years. And the reason that the government paused this is twofold. Number one, there's this extraordinary concern about safety. So we want to make sure everybody recognizes that the number one priority for these vaccines is safety. Number two, the second reason is we need to study these 6 people. What were the common factors? Were there common underlying factors, things that precipitated this? But more importantly, they really wanted to pause this to make sure that medical practitioners understood that this is not the normal type of blood clot. So this is a blood clot associated with a significant drop in these cells in our body called platelets. And platelets are part of our coagulation system. And so this is called a thrombocytopenic thrombosis, meaning we develop blood clots because we have this distinct drop in our platelets. And when we have that, the typical treatment, which is heparin, which is a blood thinner, makes it worse. So we wanted to make sure that the medical community knew if you see a patient that you suspect this thrombotic thrombocytopenia clot, then you don't give them heparin. And so we want to make sure that they understood that you got to check platelets. You got to check something called a D-dimer. You may want to check for an anti-factor IV platelet antibody. And so they really wanted to get that messaging out. If you look at, how often does this occur? Well, we've given 6.85 million doses of the J&J. There were 6 cases, so it's less than 1 in a million. But if you look at the subgroup of people who it happened to, 18 to 48-year-old women, I don't know how many of those people have been vaccinated. So, and that I haven't seen that statistic. But there was one of these cases in the trial. So in the J&J trial, one person developed this specific type of thrombus, and it was a male, actually. So this is not female exclusive. And so it was like 1 in 20,000. So still a very rare event. But we need to understand it better. We need to study it. We need to make sure that medical practitioners know that this is happening and that standard heparin is not the appropriate therapy, and there are other therapies for it. So that was the real reason for the long pause, is education. I don't see that it's not going to come back. I mean, listening to the experts, we will see the J&J vaccine, in my opinion, based on what I've listened to. Will they come back with some type of caveat? Maybe we shouldn't give this to women 18 to 48. Maybe we should, have some restrictions on who we give it to. But that's up to the advisory committee. So I think they met Saturday or Sunday, and they're going to come out with some recommendations to the FDA. And Dr. Fauci thinks we'll see it by the end of the week again. So, stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned to all of this, and stay tuned to Podcast by George. We'll get you.
The other thing I want to emphasize about this is, we see a lot of body aches and headaches after the vaccine, within the first 24 hours. These headaches, and, if you present with a headache, these headaches are not occurring right away. They're occurring 7 to 14 days after the vaccine. So that headache you get right after the vaccine is not part of this spectrum. The other thing about these headaches is they are a headache like you've never experienced in your life. So, if you are, as a physician or as a person, all of a sudden you're 10 days out and you have the worst headache of your life that you've never experienced before, you need to seek medical attention.
Okay, great advice, but we're not done. I would never end one of these without your kind of big picture here, because things are changing, as I mentioned, as we started off. I think we've seen a bigger shift here just between these two podcasts and maybe the entire past year. Doc, what's your advice now overall? What's your big picture?
Big picture is we're still in a pandemic, number one. We still need to be cautious, but we can take some liberties that we haven't had in the past, and you can gather with other people who have been fully vaccinated, but still be careful in public places where you don't know who and who hasn't been vaccinated, what variant might be transmitted. And again, we're doing this, when we look at mutations happen as the virus replicates. So the more the virus replicates, the more the virus is transmitted, the more mutations we are likely to see. So by practicing continued good public health hygiene, we can slow down those variants. And so I think that's still really important. The other thing is, again, like I said last time, be grateful we even have these vaccines. Yeah. Okay, give gratitude, because this has never happened in the history of vaccinations that we've developed this fast. And just be grateful that you're still alive, and there's light at the end of the tunnel here. Okay, we just it's sort of like running a marathon, right? You see that last 2 miles and you just, there's light at the end of the tunnel. There is light at the end of the tunnel, but we still have to continue to be cautious.
Yeah, there's light at the end of the tunnel, but if you want to step out into it, you got to make it to the end of the tunnel. So
yeah, you don't want to step out into the front of that train where the light's moving towards you, do you?
Yeah, that's right.
But it's just like I'm doing a home construction project. All of my construction workers had COVID 2 weeks ago. So it's still here. They were sick for 2 weeks, and miserably so. And so we have to remember, COVID is still here. It has not disappeared. It's still spreading. And in fact, in, 32 states, the number of COVID cases have gone up in the last couple of weeks. So.
All right, Doc, we're out of time. Dr. Andrew Nish, thanks for coming back on another podcast by George.
Thanks, George. Nice to see you.
Yeah, folks, that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. Please go to podcastbygeorge.com and subscribe on the platform that you like. I mean, you can listen to it on iTunes. You can watch it on YouTube. You can see us on Facebook. Subscribe, ring the notification bell on YouTube. But that's going to do it for today. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.